most overrated aspect of every GTA game, starting with GTA 3. Now don't get me wrong, this game is a straight-up classic that changed gaming forever. But let's be real about its mafia storyline, which honestly might be the most overrated part of the whole package. Think about it. We've seen this story a million times before. You've got your typical Italian mafia setup with the same old character types we've seen in every mob movie since The Godfather. There's Salvatore Leone, who's basically your stereotypical Don straight out of central casting. Then you've got the usual mix of hot-headed capos, sleazy underbosses, and the whole betrayal within the family thing that you can see coming from a mile away. What's kind of funny is that GTA 3 actually did so many revolutionary things with its gameplay and open world. But when it came to the story, they just went with the safest, most predictable route possible. Like you could swap out these characters with ones from Goodfellas or The Sopranos, and most people probably wouldn't even notice the difference. Even the main character being silent feels like a missed opportunity to add something fresh to these worn-out tropes. And here's the thing. The game's other gangs, like the Triads and the Yakuza, actually had some interesting stuff going on. But they got sidelined for this super generic mafia plot we've all seen before. I mean, the Colombian cartel stuff was way more interesting than watching Salvatore do his best Marlon Brando impression for the 100th time. Don't take this as me hating on GTA 3 though. The game is still amazing for so many other reasons. The freedom, the humor, the way it basically created the modern open world genre. I just think it's weird how everyone praises the mafia storyline when it's probably the most cookie-cutter part of an otherwise groundbreaking game. It's like they had all these wild creative ideas, but then just grabbed the most basic mafia movie script they could find and called it a day. Next, Vice City's aesthetics, despite being iconic, might actually be the most overrated part of the game. And honestly, this might ruffle some feathers, but hear me out. Look, we all know Vice City's neon-soaked Miami vibes have become legendary, but it's basically just Miami Vice with the serial numbers filed off. The whole pastel-colored art style, the palm trees, the sunset-drenched beaches, it's not really doing anything new. It's more like a really well-done cosplay of 1980s pop culture than something truly original. The thing is, the game gets so much praise for basically just copying the exact same aesthetic we've seen in every piece of 80s Miami-based media. Like you've got the flamingo pink buildings, the synthwave sunsets, the white suit that's totally not supposed to be Don Johnson's. It's all just greatest hits of 80s visual cliches played on repeat. And let's talk about those interiors for a second. Most of them are pretty bare bones when you really look at them. The mansion interiors? Pretty basic. The clubs? Kind of empty. The game relies so heavily on its exterior aesthetic that it sometimes feels like a Hollywood movie set. All facade and not much substance behind it. What's funny is that the game's best parts aren't even about the aesthetics. The fantastic soundtrack, the memorable characters like Lance Vance and Ken Rosenberg, and that brilliant Ray Liotta performance as Tommy Vercetti. These are what make the game special. The whole pastel Miami thing is just window dressing that's gotten way too much credit over the years. Vice City is still one of the greatest games ever made. But people act like its visual style was some kind of revolutionary artistic statement when really, it was just really good at copying homework from Miami Vice, Scarface, and every other piece of 80s Miami pop culture. The game's true innovation was in how it used these familiar visuals to tell its story and create its atmosphere, not in the actual aesthetic choices themselves. The thing that kills me is how this somewhat unoriginal visual style has become so influential that now when people think 80s aesthetic, they think of Vice City, even though Vice City was just copying what came before it. It's like someone making a copy of a copy and getting praised for inventing the photocopier. But hey, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe there's something to be said for how well the game packaged all these borrowed elements together. Still, next time someone starts gushing about how groundbreaking Vice City's aesthetics were, maybe remind them that Don Johnson did it first. Now let's talk about one of San Andreas's most hyped-up features that honestly didn't add much to the game. Those RPG mechanics everyone seems to love. Yeah, I'm talking about hitting the gym, watching CJ go from skinny to buff to fat, and all that stamina stuff. These features sound cool on paper, but in practice, they're mostly just busy work that takes you away from the actual fun parts of the game. Like, Who really enjoyed spending hours in a virtual gym doing the same button combinations over and over just to make CJ's biceps bigger? It's basically a glorified mini-game that you feel forced to play. The whole body transformation system gets praised as this deep mechanic, but let's be real. It's pretty shallow. Eat too much, you get fat. Work out, you get muscular. Don't eat, you get skinny. That's not revolutionary gameplay. That's just a really basic simulation that adds more chores to your to-do list. And the worst part? If you don't keep up with it, your stats start dropping, making it feel like a virtual Tamagotchi you have to babysit. The stamina system is another thing that sounds better than it actually is. Sure, it's kind of cool that CJ gets better at swimming or running the more you do it, but did it really make the game more fun? Most of the time it just meant you had to take the long way around until you built up enough stamina to swim across that body of water. Or you had to keep running around blocks like a weirdo to level up your running. The funny thing is, San Andreas is such an amazing game despite these features, not because of them. The sprawling map, the incredible story, the memorable characters, the variety of missions. These are what make the game special. The RPG elements feel like they were added just so they could put deep customization on the back of the box. I mean, I get why people thought it was cool at the time. No other open-world game was doing anything like this back then. But being first doesn't always mean being best. And looking back, these features feel more like a distraction than an essential part of what makes San Andreas great. Next, GTA 4, and this whole realism thing that fans keep raving about. You know what I mean? The supposedly super realistic physics, the gritty atmosphere, the serious story. But let's cut through the hype for a minute. Sure, watching cars crumple realistically and seeing Nico ragdoll downstairs was cool, but come on. This is still a game where you can survive falling off skyscrapers, or take a rocket to the face and walk it off after hiding behind a wall for 10 seconds. The much-praised driving physics? Yeah, every car handles like a boat on ice, which isn't exactly peak realism. People act like the darker tone and serious story made it this ultra-realistic crime drama, but Nico still goes from struggling immigrant to one-man army who takes down entire criminal organizations. The story's great, don't get me wrong, but fans talk about it like it's The Wire of video games when it's more like an above-average action movie. And Liberty City, for all its gritty atmosphere and impressive detail, still has that video game logic where cops will try to murder you for accidentally bumping their car. The NPCs that everyone praised for being so lifelike? They mostly just walk around saying the same few lines and react to everything by either running away or trying to fistfight you. The relationship system gets held up as this deep life simulation, but it boils down to, "Hey cousin, wanna go bowling?" every 5 minutes. Roman calls you for hangouts while you're literally in the middle of gunfights. Super realistic, right? The combat system that was supposed to revolutionize the series with its realism is basically just duck and cover shooting gallery stuff we've seen in every third-person game since. And that smartphone everyone praised? It's just a fancy menu system with some extra steps. Look, GTA 4 is a fantastic game that pushed the series in an interesting new direction. The darker tone, the more grounded story, the focus on character relationships, all of that stuff works really well. But this idea that it's some pinnacle of realism in gaming is just fans looking at it through rose-tinted glasses. It's like people got so caught up in comparing it to San Andreas's over-the-top style that they convinced themselves GTA 4 was basically a crime simulator. In reality, it's still very much a video game, just one that swapped out the purple dildo bats for slightly more believable weapons. And you know what? That's totally fine. It doesn't need to be ultra-realistic to be great. Finally, GTA 5's open world. You know, that gorgeous, massive map that everyone keeps praising. Sure, it looks incredible with those stunning sunsets over Los Santos and the beautifully detailed mountain ranges. But once you've spent some real time with it, you start noticing how empty it all feels. The biggest letdown has to be the lack of interiors. You've got this massive city full of amazing-looking buildings, but you can barely enter any of them. Most shops are just static fronts where you press a button to trigger a menu. Compare that to older games where you could at least explore more indoor spaces, and it feels like a step backward. The fact that they didn't even let us enter most of the cool mansions in Vinewood Hills feels like such a missed opportunity. Driving around the map starts feeling pointless after a while. Yeah, the countryside looks pretty, but what are you actually doing out there? Most of the time you're just passing through to get to another mission marker. There's no real reason to explore beyond finding a few random collectibles or jumping off Mount Chiliad for the 100th time. The side activities are pretty shallow too. Tennis, golf, yoga, they're all there, but who actually plays them more than once? The random events are cool the first time you see them, but they start repeating pretty quickly. Even the neighborhoods that look super alive at first glance don't really offer much interaction beyond walking past NPCs who say the same few lines. For all its massive scale, Los Santos can feel weirdly artificial. The traffic always follows the same patterns, the pedestrians have limited reactions, and most of the cool stuff you see happening is just window dressing you can't really interact with. It's like they built this incredible movie set but forgot to fill it with actual things to do. The underwater areas are probably the biggest waste. They made this huge, detailed ocean floor, but besides a few collectibles and the occasional treasure hunt, there's no real reason to explore it. It's just empty space that looks pretty. What's frustrating is that all the pieces are there for an amazing open world. The visuals, the scale, the variety of environments. But instead of filling it with meaningful content, they settled for making it look good in screenshots. Sure, you can cause chaos and mess around with the physics, but that gets old when there's no deeper interaction with the world itself. GTA 5 is still an incredible game with great missions and characters, but its open world feels more like a beautiful backdrop than a living place worth exploring. It's style over substance, and after all these years, that's become pretty clear. Finally, Liberty City Stories, and this weird glorification it gets as some kind of meaningful prequel to GTA 3. People act like it's this essential piece of the Liberty City saga, but let's be real here for a second. Tony Cipriani's story feels like they took GTA 3's mafia plot, threw it in a blender, and poured out something way less interesting. Everyone talks about how it expands the lore, but what did we actually learn? That the Leones were doing typical mob stuff before GTA 3? Shocking. It's like they had a checklist of mafia movie cliches and just went down the list again. The whole thing with Tony and his mom is probably the only somewhat original part, and even that feels like it's trying way too hard to be funny. The rest is just Tony running around doing exactly what Claude would do a few years later, except with more talking and less impact. And let's address the elephant in the room, Tony himself. In GTA 3, he's this interesting side character with some personality, but in Liberty City Stories, he's basically just Tommy Vercetti without the charisma. They even gave him similar missions and story beats, but none of them hit the same way. It's like they were trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice and ended up with a dim flashlight instead. The worst part is how people defend it as this crucial piece of the GTA 3 story. But what does it really add? The Leone family was powerful, then they had some troubles, then they were still around for GTA 3. That's it. That's the big revelation. You could skip this game entirely and not miss anything important in the GTA 3 storyline. This game feels more like GTA 3 fan fiction than a real prequel. Yeah, it's fun enough to play, and for a PSP game it was pretty impressive. But this idea that it's some masterpiece of storytelling or vital piece of GTA lore? Nah, it's just a decent portable GTA game that happens to take place before GTA 3. Nothing more, nothing less. And we are done. Let me know in the comments which things about GTA you personally find overrated as hell. I'll be reading your comments. Also subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.